Hello and welcome to this very spooky episode of Quaker. Today I'm going to be taking us on another journey between the links between Quakerism and the supernatural. So last year I looked at the link between Quakerism and vampire hunters and slayers and warriors against evil. But this time I'm looking at it the other way around, and I'm looking at the link between Quakerism and witchcraft. And the first place that I want to start with this is looking at Pendle Hill. Now, Pendle Hill is very well known in Quakerism, kind of for two reasons. If you're in America, Pendle Hill might be more well known because it's a Quaker center for study and so on, kind of like a Woodbrook in America. But in England, and I'm guessing this is where Pendle Hill originally got its name from, is a hill in Lancashire, a not very nice part of the UK, but hey-ho, and is very well known amongst Quakers for a famous part of George Fox's journal. This is one of the places that he visited, and he basically he was called by God to climb it, and on the top he could see the sea. And he says that God showed him where a great people will be gathered, which has become quite a very well-known quote amongst Quakers. Sort of like a foundational moment, I suppose, that this was the start of where Quakerism was really going to be getting going. But this Pendle Hill, not, I think, 40 years before George Fox was had his vision there, was the site of a very, very well-known witch trial known as the Pendle Hill witch trials, in which 10 witches, people accused of witchcraft, were executed by hanging. It's just a bit less than how many died at Salem. So quite a lot of witches dying in this area. And so you can kind of imagine that sort of reputation would linger. And certainly after 40 years, I'm certain that it was. Now, George Fox was not a Lancashireman, thank goodness. But he was born in Leicestershire, which by the standards of the time, that probably is quite far away from Lancashire. But nonetheless, you kind of think that the people around him would maybe said, oh, by the way, big witch place, best to avoid, despite what God might be telling you to do. So that at the very least, he would have been forewarned that maybe this might not be the best place PR-wise to start your new religious movement. But he does anyway. And so the question kind of has to be, well, is the witchy element part of the point? And I'm drawing on kind of two things that I listened to last year about this, but both are basically around Sarah Jelena Walcott, who I listened to the podcast first on Quakers Today, and then I read her article in Friends Journal. And she basically looks precisely at this question. I'll put links down for both those things in the show notes. And she kind of says that, I mean, I've never been to Pendle Hill, so I cannot say by my own, I believe I've ever stepped foot in Lancashire. At least I hope not. But she kind of describes it as like this great sort of sacred place, and it kind of draws this sort of mystical nature of it, kind of draws spiritual people to it. And so she says this is kind of maybe why George Fox was drawn to this location, which fine. Who am I to, as I said, we don't know, but that's certainly a reason. I think there could be other reasons as well. I think maybe he's wanting to cause a stir, maybe, by going to this place which has this reputation. So, if you're looking at it cynically, maybe he's doing it in order to try and say, oh wow, this guy's going up that witch hill, let's go check it out, and then hit them with Quakerism. I suppose also you could say that, going on our episode on banishing demons and stuff, maybe wanted to banish the demons away from Pendle Hill and cleanse it in the new light. I think also there probably might be an element of, because the early Quakers were again and again subverting traditional cultural norms from Christianity, and I think probably there may have been a certain link, shall we say, between early Quakers and the paranormal. These were a group of people who were marginalized by society, who had views that would be considered blasphemous by probably a large part of the population. So, that link is surely there. And I think that link was more tenuous. It's more tenuous today than maybe it was back then. We live in a world which has been, especially if you think about Europe, a world which has been Christianized for hundreds of years, and then went through the Reformation, went through the Enlightenment, all these sort of things that slowly push away the link between humanity and the paranormal, the supernatural. It's been called blasphemy, then it's been called witchcraft, then it's been called stupidity based on not very enlightened, and so it's that we're so far away from that. But I think the link back then was probably a lot more porous. And when you think about it, the links between Quakers and early Quakers and witchcraft, there's quite a lot. When you think about it, we talked about. I read there was another distracted woman over in Suffolk as well. I can't remember when my first distracted woman was, but there was another one of, and apparently she went to a Quaker meeting and had a fit and then tried to kill herself, and all sorts of craziness went on. That was obviously caused by her going to a Quaker meeting. But if you think about things like the role of women, obviously, I think is quite a big one in terms of them being actively part of ministry and preaching. I think, as I've said many times, this was so radical and so subversive that I think it kind of invited people linking it with witchcraft, that they were outsiders, that they believed also that ministry didn't have to happen inside the sanctity of a church on sacred ground, that it could happen outside. Again, the links with, covens and things can be drawn quite well from that. Also, Quaker hats. I think we need to talk about Quaker hats a little bit. I read this great article, again, I'll put it in there, on the history of the witch hat, effectively, and where it came from. And one of the it seems like everyone wore hats because, and we talked about this many a time on this show. Everyone loved hats, and it's us who are the weirdos who don't seem to wear hats. Everyone wore hats, and especially people liked these big kind of coned hats with broad rim, very practical in rain and sun or whatever, very practical indeed. But nowadays is linked with witches, and one of the things that probably helped with this is our Quakers, because Quakers kind of clung on to this traditional style of dress for way longer than everyone else, and because they were these subversive outsiders, and they were accused of witchcraft for reasons already given, then the link between the Quaker hat and witch hats kind of became more and more similar. Now, I'm not saying that's probably the only cause. That the article and the videos in there give lots of other reasons as well. But I think that's a nice little Quaker link between Quakerism and witchcraft there. I suppose in all as Christian denominations, and whether or not you count Quakerism as a Christian denomination, we all agree, as I said in the video, it's certainly rooted in Christianity. And I think all denominations that are at least rooted in Christianity probably have this kind of negative view towards witchcraft and paganism, because, we've got many centuries of that being said to us as being a bad thing. But I think Quakerism has always been kind of on this sort of liminal side of the side between accepting the supernatural and sort of paranormal and fitting in with normal Christian orthodoxy. I think that line has always been very tenuously followed by Quakers. And I know, I personally don't know any, but I know that there are quite a lot of Quakers who also would, identify in terms of any one of these kind of extra brackets, like pagan, like Wicca, like witch, all these kind of things. There are Quakers who do actively accept that as part of their Quaker identity. The article I mentioned it just at the beginning there, also kind of talked about, magic being the art of shifting consciousness, which I quite liked, and think, well, because obviously if you have all of these loaded words, pagan, witchcraft, magic, all of these words have negative connotations in a European mindset, whereas the art of shifting consciousness, that can be understood with a lot more distance than other loaded terms, you can think, well, yeah, I suppose if you identify magic as that, then Quakerism is about that too, because we are kind of trying to get into this, trying to get beyond ourselves, trying to listen to something beyond ourselves, moving our consciousness out to meet with the divine. And I suppose another thing that is mentioned in there is paganism. She also talks about animism as a sort of maybe more popular way of talking about paganism. Are they threats to Christianity or to the Christian character of Quakerism? And I don't think so. If we think about the Green Christ and the Green Man and the links there that people have always had, I think it's kind of a bit of a debate whether or not the Green Man was actually pagan or whether it's just an expression of Christian worship or Christian tradition. It certainly is more green and more leafy and maybe more like nature based than perhaps maybe traditional Christian dogma is. And I go back to thinking about Ben Wood, who also said, I think he said in his video that his Christianity is quite green, has very leafy edges to it. It makes me think about what he was talking about with Anne Conway as well. That all rocks eventually having souls, and everything in creation basically coming towards God ultimately, in terms of like an infinite journey through infinity. I think there's things in there. I don't think necessarily that it needs to be an either or. And actually, if you look at how, especially if you look at how Europe was colonized and other areas of the world as well, there was a long period of where there was a blend between Christianity, the new religion being brought in, and the local paganism. And because people valued both in their sort of spiritual life, they were attracted to the idea of Christianity and its world message and its promises of salvation and stuff. But they were also very linked to the worship of their ancestors, to the worship of their place as well. That links them to their ground, to their homeland. So I don't think that any Quakers were actually witches, like casting spells and meeting men on heaths and proclaiming them King of Scotland or whatever. First off, I think, as I've said, the difference between what we would see as witchcraft and what that means for us versus what it meant at that time, I think is different. And I think probably we have to just accept that. We have to understand that these people were, as the early Quaker movement was starting, these people were on the outside. They were very different to the majority of people, and you can see why maybe they might be attracted to people who were in similar situations. I think Quakers probably have had to choose: are they more witches or more like the vampire slayers that I talked about last year? I think they probably are more vampire slayers than witches themselves, but they certainly do have a witchy element to them that cannot be denied, hats and all. And I think today, as we accept more and more parts of spirituality within Quakerism, we think about, I talk a lot about accepting and welcoming atheist and non-theist friends into meeting. Then we kind of also have to accept the other areas as well and see what they bring to the meeting as well. If we consider continuing revelation and stuff, I think our world is, now our spiritual world is one where we are, as I said, completely devoid and removed from our understanding of locality. And I think something that paganism, animism, wicca, all that kind of stuff can really bring us back to an idea of nature and an idea of an animated world, where a world with a soul, or a world that is alive, and that ties us to a place and the spirituality and the meaningfulness of a place, which has been completely deracinated from our society today. I think I welcome a kind of a more sort of a green Quakerism. I think in all aspects, also in the ecological as well. But I think the ecological aspect of green Quakerism could fit very nicely in a sort of idea of an animist Quakerism as well. I think I'm just open to all kind of things. I think certainly Quakerism for me means what it means to me, but that's based on my understanding. And I think there is room in Quakerism for these spaces, like as there were at the beginning of Quakerism, where there were people having very different opinions on things like that, like on the role of those Quaker hats and should they be taken off or anything like that. And so I think we can be open to this as well, and certainly listen to like we do with tour ministry and see what it where it might lead us. Quaker hats, witch trials, another distracted woman, all going on. I wish you a very spooky Halloween if you do celebrate, and if it's just a regular day for you, because all days are sacred. Then go on your merry way and do Quaker stuff. And I will see you next time.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.